Leg stretch is go back for any questions or comments on item 3. And I'll go through them, and if somebody has a question or comment, we'll go through it. I'll try and time management so that we don't spend too much time on this. But we want to get the questions out. So, first of all, demonstration project progress. From the stakeholders, any comments or questions? Paul?
Yes, I have some questions and comments. With regard to the floating constructed wetlands, what I've done in the past in evaluating projects, I think you ought to assume whatever you know now would be a fully commercial operation somewhere in the water body. And you ought to calculate what the operating cost is by year and what the cost would be if in fact you had a major storm in September or October or something. How do you manage that whole process? And then figure out what the economics are under a success mode. Now, with regard to the PRBs, I think you mentioned, and my understanding is the focus is essentially on putting in wells and injecting some kind of oils into the ground as a low-cost way to do it. Is that correct? Did I understand that?
Well, one of the things we'll be doing as part of the study is to do an injection test right now, so we can better define the extent and the design that would be for full-scale, ultimately a full-scale PRB, but also use that for the demonstration projects later on.
What is the background for encouraging us to look at this commercially? What has been demonstrated to show us that this will work?
That a
Injection
PRB will work?
An injection process will work. Injection PRB.
We have a couple of experts internally and externally.
What demonstration projects are in the field operating that convince us?
I'll give you a little bit of the background of the PRBs. The PRBs have been used in the industry, not in the wastewater industry, but in use many years.
Paul, please let him finish.
So obviously, one of the things that is very unique is that nitrogen is one of those first things that has to be taken up before you can get to the other components that are dealt with and other things. So there are many full-scale operations ongoing currently with PRBs. So there is no reason to believe it's not going to work to treat the nitrogen. So obviously, doing a pilot study will then define exactly what needs to happen for very specific to Orleans. And that's why we want to do that.
I think you need to do some work ahead of time because I've worked in this area. I've done a lot of work in PRBs and Superfund, so I'm familiar with it.
Okay.
The first thing you need to establish chemically in the lab is will the vegetable oils or whatever you propose to use extract the nitrogen and to what level? And that needs to be done before you even do anything out in the field. The second thing you need to establish is if you inject vegetable oil, I'm assuming that's your base, but because that's what Sia talked about, but I don't know what you've selected. You've got to show yourself that, in fact, if you inject it in the wells, it will fill the volume that you expect it to. And once it's released from the well bore, do you know how to control it? Third, vegetable oil is lighter than water, and its density and viscosity change according to temperature. So you need to establish that, in fact, you can do this, you can manage it, you can control it, and it won't just go in the injection well and pop up to the surface, which addresses a question that Judith brought up before. How do you control this liquid injectant in the environment so it doesn't wind up in the local water body? And then you need to do, I don't know if you have an expert in fluid flow and fine media, porous media. You need to figure out if you can model or figure out how this is going to operate before you do any field experiments, seems to me.
Okay, Jeff?
Yeah, I'd like to offer an opportunity that the town might want to pursue. At the Oyster Symposium in Falmouth, the Nature Conservancy talked about some of their projects. In the state of Massachusetts, they have a goal of developing 5,000 acres of shellfish beds and reefs to restore water quality. They've done about 100. They work with towns. They work, I think the city was New Bedford that they told. they told about one of their experiences. It might be an opportunity for Orleans to join with the Nature Conservancy that got some experience and expertise also, and that's in addition to what we have in the team. But they may want to be partners in this, and that may help us along the way.
Okay, thank you. I'll be back to you. Any other questions from, okay, Paul?
A follow-up question, with regard to the landfill, have you done any independent sampling and analysis of the groundwater?
We have not yet, but that is planned to be done as part of the project.
Okay, one thing just to note, that in the past when MEP did it, they did not look at the reduced nitrogen concentrations, they only looked at nitrate. And a landfill well, it used to have septic lagoons and is a source of chemically reduced nitrogen. And if you look at the data that was in the MEP report for the Eastham landfill, the concentration, nitrogen level for these reduced forms from the septic lagoons is 8 times the nitrate concentration. And that becomes an important issue as to whether or not these vegetable oils or whatever you're considering will extract the nitrogen. And a final comment is you've got to look at other species that are in the groundwater could blind or effectively render the vegetable oil inactive. So these are a number of things you need to establish, I think, before you do a demonstration.
Mike?
Let me go back to your first comments, Paul, on the PRBs. Yesterday there was a 2-hour conference call with EPA. Orleans has been accepted for a grant, which means EPA is providing free technical assistance to look at a demonstration PRB at Lonnie's Pond. And the purpose of the demonstration project is essentially, and they're doing 6 of them on the Cape, and the work plan basically, Paul, is very consistent with what you just said. They're looking at soil characterization, sieve analysis, gradation analysis, geochemistry, flow velocity. They may be doing bench tests, scaled bench tests in a lab with the soil and water mixture before they go into the field. They're looking at different types of materials to inject, the interaction of those chemically with the soils, chemically with the water, and also with regard to transmissivity and hydrogeology with regard to surfacing or dipping or whatever. That's the purpose of the demo projects that they're looking at Lonnie's Pond. We have, as part of our team, Jim Begley, who's helped EPA develop that scope and is working with them on the Lonnie's Pond PRB project to answer the questions that you're asking.
So
there.
is that before you do a demonstration project under this?
That would be parallel to it. We have 2 parallel going on now. Jim Begley is also looking at the landfill, and he has identified just what you said there, that there's not only nitrate, which has been monitored by GHD over the years, but there's also ammonia at the landfill. And the partition of ammonia and nitrate and where it gets oxygenated is a question that has to be answered in the monitoring program that we're looking at for the landfill.
Fine. Another follow-up on Lonnie's Pond, not to take all the time. But there's a discharge from the bog, the cranberry bog, across the road. If you put a PRB in, it won't capture that. It would seem to me you need to measure the volume and the concentration of nitrogen that would be emanating from that
Yeah.
bog during
I
periodic.
think the purpose of this demo, unfortunately, is not to clean Lonnie's Pond. It's to do a demo on a PRB that could be used for Lonnie's Pond or could be used on other locations in Pleasant Bay especially, and even in Rock Harbor Creek or other places.
Now, since there are established procedures for solid PRBs, and I sent you an article from Pinder, which I assume you passed on, where they use shavings mixed with the normal ground. They reduce nitrates, although very high concentrations, by 99% or something. Why not just do something that's already been in the field?
Well, I think that's what's going to be looked at. you're getting into technical details.
I just want to understand where this is going, that's all I want to.
Well, I think we have experts that do understand it.
Judith?
I was just going to say, for once, Paul and I really do agree. And I
Yeah.
do think that there was a lot of interest in the wood chip technology, quote, of PRBs. And I would hope that as we move forward and look at this, that would
Absolutely.
get some serious consideration, because I just think it has fewer downsides and risks to the vegetable oil.
Yeah, and EPA's demo projects and that initiative and our project is going to look at that alternative as well, the traditional barrier wood chip PRB.
Good, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on that section? If not, I'm going to move to,
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
just let me go to Sue Levin first, who's the liaison.
I just wanted to bring up the fact that Brewster has a DLTA grant from the commission and is in the process of looking at shellfish propagation, and both from an effectiveness standpoint, but primarily from how it's handled in watersheds with that cross multiple towns. And in our case, if Brewster, for example, wanted to do shellfish propagation as a way to remove, to address part of our TMDL in Pleasant Bay, and the only place to put shellfish is in Orleans, how you do that, who gets credit, who pays for what, that sort of thing. And that should be, we just sent a draft for review, and so that should be out probably by the end of December.
Saw that. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Phil.
Suzanne Phillips, Shellfish Waterways Committee. I have a question. I understand the process is preliminary and ongoing right now in terms of identifying sites and making up the criteria for doing the aquaculture demonstrations. My question is, what local involvement is there? And I mean people from this town who know the local waters and the bottoms and all that, the kinds of things that you look at when you do an aquaculture grant, and also some of the particulars to Orleans about propagation techniques, species, and so on.
Tom, you want to just comment on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're getting very close to having all the criteria developed, at least the preliminary, and yes, the intent is then to come down to sit with the appropriate parties to look at those criteria and help us go through the ranking of those sites because of that in-depth knowledge that people have here in the town. Very important point.
You have been on the water with the harbor master
We
and
have.
others? Correct?
Yes, that was one of the sites that a lot of the team members went back and went on the site, you know, both, again, from the land and from the water side.
Okay. All right, Ed Daly, you're now sitting in for Paul Almond.
Yes, I am. And I'd like to
You're
make
dealing with-
I'd like to make a few comments about the monitoring and MEP study update section of the discussion that we just heard. I have put together a little handout. I think most people have it. Is there anybody who doesn't have this handout? I have some extra ones here. Maybe you could pass them around for people who don't have them.
Yeah, Ed, I was going through this in sequence, Ed, and I think monitoring was the last section under
Oh,
three.
you want to wait till the end?
That's what I said I'd do. So
Okay.
we can hand this around, you
Yeah.
can read it while we're going through the other sections.
Yeah.
Let's, disposal site studies. Does anybody have any questions about disposal site studies or comments? I think you know where we are, what's going on. Any questions? All right. Downtown planning study, Betsy gave you a summary of where, oh, sorry.
There was a question.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick one on the disposal sites. And I looked back at the schedule, Mike, from last year. It looks like at least the DOT discussions should have occurred by June. And, you know, I'm seeing a significant delay. And are the other alternate disposal sites relative to the comparative for that one gone? Is that still the only one in that area that's available?
The answer is there are two, well, there are actually three. The DOT site, 223 Beach Road, and the third one was an Eversource property. We have not approached Eversource yet for a variety of reasons.
Like what?
I think we've made a wise decision. Okay, downtown planning study, any comments or questions? The big part of this is on the 15th, next week, or 2 weeks, sorry. Paul? Yes? You want to sit down where Ed is, or I'll let you.
I just have a quick question. I think, Tom, you mentioned that you're going to look at gravity sewers and vacuum sewers as two basic frameworks. I think you should look at step and steg as well for the downtown area.
I think all of them were included.
The intent is to look at the ones that, and I'll see if I can quickly call that slide back up,
So, yeah.
is the ones on the left-hand side, those are the all of those are going to be looked at. On the right-hand side, I mentioned that we're going to prepare a layout for the two highest ranked types. Whatever comes out of that, I used gravity vacuum as an example. It could be step and steg with low pressure. It could be a combination of 2 or 3 of those technologies. So it was not excluding any of those at this time.
That's in the work program that we all approved. So.
Are you going to provide the calculations whereby you rank them?
Yes, that's part of the criteria matrix and part of the public record of showing what the criterion was and how each of these technologies were ranked with the input from the town.
John?
Yeah, just back to the disposal site, a quick question. I've got a letter from Mr. Kelly here. And it sounds a little bit like a chicken and egg, but the town is only at this time requesting approval to conduct testing to determine soil, geological, and environmental characteristics of the Exit 12 site, not for final permission to use the site as permanent disposal. I guess I put this out to anybody. Does it not make sense to negotiate with DOT to get permission to do this before we spend the tax dollar money on testing on a site that we may not be able to use, and then we have to find another site, and now we got to go back to town meeting and get more money again?
The discussions with DOT are ongoing, so we'll deal with that, John, when we get to it. We're waiting for a telephone call back. We'll deal with those issues.
We'll have that answer tonight.
I won't have it tonight, I guarantee you that. It's like getting an answer from Eversource.
Okay, to that point, though, if AECom is going to start to, I mean, what are we waiting for the answer? The permission to test the site?
Yes.
Or, okay, so my point is, shouldn't we be having a conversation to use the site versus just test the site?
Tom, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I guess 2 items on that. One, yes, there is a letter that's gone back and forth to DOT requesting permission to get access to the site. Nothing is going to occur, and we've also submitted a letter to Brian Dudley from DEP showing the protocol of what we would like to do. DEP will not give permission to do that protocol until we have access to the site, so that nothing will be spent until access is actually given.
And by access, you mean use of the site in a future project? Or just access to test?
Access for the testing at this point, and if it seems favorable, yes, we then follow up with DOT and say, here's what we would like to do.
I would just remind everybody that the town meeting approved a petition to the legislature. I testified before the legislature joint committee. They were very favorable on that subject, but ultimately it's DOT that makes the decision unless the legislature tells them to make the decision that's the right decision. So. Okay. Downtown planning study, any comments? Betsy gave you a pretty good rundown on where we are. It's on the 15th. It'll be in the Council on Aging, and you saw how it was going to do. Try and find out where we are. Okay.
Do we have a time update on that, Mr. Chairman?
It's in the evening from 6:30 to 8:30.
Thank you.
My calendar had the evening, but I didn't have the time. Thank you, Betsy. Okay. Downtown system engineering, collection, treatment, and septic. Any further comments on that? We beat septic around pretty hard earlier. And I think what Paul Almond's question certainly has been answered. Okay. Public-private partnership options. Mike gave us a rundown on that. Any questions or comments on that? All right. Financial evaluation, Joshua.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure that we are going to cover 3 areas, one of which I already raised in the discussion. At first glance, the model and the description of what they're going to analyze looks pretty complete. But I want to make sure that we do a comparative allocation of taxes, betterment, and fees of the various options, and that we're able to compare apples to apples when we look at the 3 areas, again, taxes, betterment, and fees. Second, as part of looking at as part of establishing the criteria for comparing the various systems, the 5 that were put up there. The Finance Committee is very concerned that we are able to conduct diligence on currently operating systems in municipalities that are similar and applicable to Orleans. So if there are step-stag systems, if there are vacuum systems, if there are gravity systems that are out there in municipalities that are similar to Orleans, we would really like to see those physical data. Finally, the Finance Committee has done some work, and I know that the Selectmen have done some work as well on the property allocated wastewater obligation structure proposed by Tom Bryan, and I know, Mike, you've had some discussion with him as well. We'd like to see an analysis of the practicality of that approach and whether or not it's applicable and realistic to get some enabling legislation passed, and if so, what the financial implications of that are, as I said earlier, on a comparative allocation of taxes, betterment, and fees.
Okay. Question, Jim?
On the financial evaluation, I recently read in the paper that the town was surprised to hear that the cost for the police station increased over the last several years. We just heard today that we're moving ahead with plans to demolish Tri-Town because of the potential cost of inflation. Can we start including in all of our financial evaluations the cost of delays? We're worried about the affordability, and if we keep pushing this down the line, we risk coming up with numbers that are going to increase over time because we seem to be repeating some of the same discussions. So I'd ask that in all of our financial evaluations, we start projecting what does it cost if we keep pushing this down the road.
May I just comment, Doug, before I go to you. Last spring, the voters in Orleans town meeting made a significant amendment to the capital planning process here in Orleans. And it has been voted unanimously by the town meeting. It was approved by the Attorney General. It has to be voted at the election on May 19th in 2016 to become formal. But that process goes exactly where you're going. That you start projects 5 years out and you have the best estimate, and then you work on them annually to refine that estimate so that when you get into the actual capital budget, you know what that project's going to cost. Now, in the case of the police station, the work of the committee has been exceptional. They had a number that was given to them in 2008. They actually did a peer review of that number, went out, and we're told that the number at 10.5 million, I think, was a valid number. As they've gotten into the design, they've been working towards that number plus 10% to deal with the complexities of that project. And the selectmen and the finance committee hear from Tom Finan at least every month as they're chipping away to try and understand whether the window mullion should be a ½ inch or 3/4 inch and so forth. But the article in the newspaper pointed out that they had not included numbers in 2008 for an owner's project manager. And it turned out that that estimate did not include architectural services during construction. And those are two absolutely critical elements of any construction project. So part of the problem is that those had been not thought about or had been glossed over. Having personally done some of these projects in my life, the key part of a project is after you open the bids and your architect or engineer is on your side. Because when the construction starts, the change order starts, and you better have the right person there, because if you don't act within 48 hours, you own them. So those are numbers that are in there.
I appreciate that, but Alan, my point is actually simpler. The reality is this process is continuing. We just heard today that the Cape Cod Commission has thrown out another potential study that will have the effect, as we start to move forward on this, we'll hear, let's wait another time, let's wait another year because of the potential the Cape Cod Commission is going to address these issues. There is a cost of delaying this. The Conservation Law Foundation and EPA has a settlement, and they have publicly said they will watch our progress. We cannot continue to delay this effort.
Right, good. Doug, you had a question?
Yeah, we all agree the finances are absolutely critical to understand. And while timelines for all of these areas, I'd love to have an estimate timeline on all of them, but especially on this one, what is an estimated timeline for getting this data back to us?
Doug, which data?
The financial evaluations.
It's being worked on 24 hours a day by AECom and refined, and as we meet, and we're going to talk about a more active meeting here before we leave, we'll get it to you as soon as we get it.
Okay.
They've been working for 7 weeks, I believe, and they've got a lot of tasks underway, and we've tried to give you the key points on those tasks this morning. Okay, anything else of Judith on finance?
Okay. Just quickly, there's been a lot of discussion about affordability, and perhaps it's worth it to delay or to wait to look at things for affordability. Aside from the issue that Jim's raising about inflation, which I agree, that's huge, there's another one when we're looking at water quality that I think we have to keep in mind, which is every year that goes by that our waters are loaded with nutrients, the whole process is those nutrients fertilize the algae blooms, drops to the bottom, becomes part of the sediments. The next year, the sediments regenerate that right back up to the water column. And it happens again, and it happens again. Every year that we wait and delay to make this more affordable, we are costing ourselves a fortune because we only have to remove more nutrients down the road. It just becomes costlier and a bigger job the more years that we take. And again, we've now spent 10, 12 years working on this. We don't have a whole lot happening yet. There really is an urgency that I wish more people would feel in terms of protecting our waters, and that's not even from the standpoint of property values or water quality of life. That's just from the practical consideration of what's it going to cost to clean up this water.
Thank you. Kevin.
Just one quick one, and again, compliments to the AECom team to come up to speed. As Alan mentioned, 7 weeks, you've done an awesome job, gathering so much that has been put in over the months that we all had collectively met last year. On your table, on the cost and revenue framework that was posted, I just call your attention to the note you have 3, parcel counts to be determined confirmed. I mentioned this during our discussions with the Water Quality Advisory Panel last year. Those parcels were set up and allocated based on history of USGS modeling, hydrogeological, and frankly, I believe you've got a very fat choppy marker that went through parcels, so you've actually got lines going through parcels. So the people that are in and out, you really need to, eventually the rubber's going to hit the road where somebody's going to say, why am I in here and others are out? Because they frankly are their neighbors, and I think you really need to revisit that because some of that USGS data is inaccurate.
Right, we've actually already started that. We're going to finalize that on Friday, this Friday. We actually sent the maps to George and to Mike to actually do exactly that issue. Exactly your reason saying it. It's just like, even if you get a sewering, if you're going to put the sewer down the street, you want to make sure you catch both sides of the street because it's obviously more cost effective that way. But so it is ongoing.
Okay, let's move on to monitoring. Just put that slide up. Ed Daly.
Yeah. Let me say, first of all, that I've heard what Mike has to say. I've read the statement of work for AECom, and I think it's a good process. I think the adaptive management approach hasn't been fleshed out yet, but I think we have all the ingredients in place to do a good job. I have a few comments on the nitrogen levels in Town Cove and Pleasant Bay, which I think are going to play a big role in how we treat adaptive management. Today we have a hybrid system that it's only a concept, but it's based on MEP modeling from 2001 to 2005. And it's all the assumptions, all the analysis, all the recommendations, all the conclusions that fed into this hybrid system that we all looked at last year are based on the what happened in the waters between 2001 and 2005. I think we all know that. But we know conditions have changed. Nauset Inlet has necked way down. It's moved north. And so the flushing into the Town Cove and Nauset Estuary has been diminished. The opposite has happened in Pleasant Bay. If we look at Pleasant Bay, the breach of 2007, which again occurred after all the analysis and the reports were done from the MEP, show a significant shift in nitrogen levels in Pleasant Bay. So if you just look at the next slide, it shows the necked down Nauset Inlet, which we all know has reduced the amount of volume of water going into the cove. Go to the next slide, and it shows the inlet that has existed in the region of 2001 to 2005, and superimposed upon that is the current, in the white lines, the current condition of the inlet. You can see back in that time frame, there was a lot more water volume going into the estuary to flush it out. The next slide shows the water sampling locations in Town Cove. But the most important thing I want to address your attention to is WMO 27. That is what is called a threshold station for water quality monitoring.
Sentinel station.
Sentinel station. They call it thresholds. I'll use the term Sentinel station. The actual report calls it a threshold station. I like Sentinel station better. Okay, so I'll use that. That's fine. So what happens, as Judith just mentioned, if you drive the nitrogen down low enough at that Sentinel station, good things happen. The amount of algae, the blooms decrease. The turbidity decreases. The sunlight is able to penetrate down and allow eelgrass to grow. The algae that die and go to the bottom and decompose no longer create a problem. So dissolved oxygen is allowed to increase, so the aquatic animals, the shellfish, the worms, the crabs, whatever, they have enough oxygen to survive. At any rate, that's the station I'm just going to look at right now. If you look at the next chart, it's a chart of nitrogen, total nitrogen concentration at the Sentinel station, WMO 27. On the left-hand side, on the vertical axis, is the concentration of nitrogen in milligrams per liter, and on the x-axis, you see its time as a function of years. The requirement from the DEP and the MEP, is the dotted and dashed line, which is at about 0.451 milligrams per liter for that Sentinel station. If you look at the three red dots on the left of the curve, which is the actual measured nitrogen in the cove, you see that the nitrogen level is much lower than it is now. Go over to the right-hand side around 2014, which is the latest data we have, and George Meservey gave me this data about a month and a half ago. So Paul has plotted it up, and you can see that in 2014, the nitrogen levels are about 40% higher than they were in the 2001-2005 region. If you look at 2015, we haven't got the data yet. We probably won't get it till next spring, but projecting along that straight line, and this past summer was quite warm, and most of the people who live or work around the cove, the shell fishermen, the boaters, they say the amount of ova or sea lettuce has been much worse this year. So, in summary, we are now looking, as what Judith says, is that much higher nitrogen levels. It looks like that it correlated with the inlet being necked down, because, as you know, the fishermen have been having troubles getting out of there for the last 5 years. So I think we really need to address how much nitrogen do we have to remove to get acceptable water quality. We know that the amount we've got in the current plan, around 5,000 kilograms, is not going to cut it. We're not going to get good water quality until we adjust the plan. And that's why we need the adaptive management effort that Mike has talked about. So I think we don't know what the plan is yet as to how we do this. But one of the things which is good, I think, is to have these workshops where we get some experts from SMAS, from AECOM, and kick this around to see if there's, how we come up with a plan to improve the water quality in Town Cove, which is pretty bad right now. Next thing, I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the 2007 breach in Pleasant Bay. The breach is still there, it hasn't gone away, and according to Cadmus, is like 14% higher volume of water entering into the Pleasant Bay estuary. By the way, this photograph is a 2015 photo given to me by Ted Keon about a week ago. So I want to talk just a few minutes about a couple of results from the Cadmus study that I think we heard last time from Carol Ridley, an excellent report that was done, that was published in July of 2015. Many of us were there at the meeting where they presented the data. At this point, let me digress a little bit. There's been an awful lot of work done in the past 15 years by people in this room, the water quality monitors who, Judith and Judy and Carol, who've been doing, and I'm sorry, I'm sure there's a lot of people who I don't know that have been working very hard to go out in the summertime, get in their boats, go out and collect the water samples, follow the chain of custody up to the laboratories to have the samples analyzed. So that's great work, and I think we all owe them a debt of gratitude. In the same way with the Pleasant Bay Alliance, I think this, having somebody take a statistical look at trends in Pleasant Bay has been very good. So thank you, Pleasant Bay Alliance, and thank you, Water Quality Monitor. The next chart shows the Orleans sampling stations for bioactive nitrogen. If you've read the MEP report, you know that the critical parameter that the MEP set thresholds on was for bioactive nitrogen. And just to point out, you look at this diagram, these are the Orleans water sampling points only. The report does a lot more in the Chatham, but I focused on just looking at the data they had in the report for Orleans, which concerns us. And if you look at that chart, you see there are green arrows. Well, where there's a green arrow, that means the trend is improving. That means bioactive nitrogen is decreasing. If you look at the red dots, or the red triangles, those are areas where the conditions are deteriorating, getting worse. The trend is up. There's more bioactive nitrogen there. And the black squares are those where no statistical comment can be made because there isn't enough data. Okay. The first chart, which is extremely important, is the Sentinel station for Orleans. There's two more in Chatham, but this is the one for Orleans. As you can see, again, it's bioactive nitrogen on the left as a function of time. And you can see the trend line is very much below the horizontal dotted line, which is the threshold value. So that's very good. This is a monotonically decreasing trend, which shows that we're, at least in 2014, significantly on a downward trend. By the way, the little p-value in the upper left-hand corner of the chart is the goodness of and the confidence that this is a statistically significant curve. What Cadmus used was anything less than 0.05 was considered not statistically determined. So this is a very good one. It's got a p-value of 0.01. And again, what's supposed to be happening now at this Sentinel station is all the good things we just talked about. Drive the nitrogen levels down, and then the system starts to recover. It doesn't recover all at once. There is a gradual process. If you look at some of the other curves beside bioactive nitrogen, you see there's still a problem with dissolved oxygen and some of the other issues. But this is the start of a favorable trend. If we look at Meeting House Pond, PBA 16, again, the p-value in the corner is excellent. It's very much less than 0.05. Again, it's a decreasing trend, and this data from Cadmus shows that in 2014, the trend line is actually touching the horizontal line, which is the threshold value under which we start to get good things happen. I have, both of those are monotonically decreasing trends. This is one of the charts, and this is the only one I'll show, is what they call a step trend. And I'll quote from the report. It says, the step trend quote, "is an abrupt shift in conditions at a specific point in time and usually corresponds to an occurrence of a discrete event," close quote. So you can see it happened right after the breach in 2007. And what it shows again, though, that in Paula Pond, the trend line is well below the bioactive nitrogen threshold set by the DEP. I would suggest everybody go read again the Cadmus report that Pleasant Bay Alliance funded. It's excellent. If you look at the last 20 pages or 13 pages of the Orleans data, you can look at all the other parameters beside bioactive nitrogen.
All right. Any questions for Ed?
I just have one more chart.
One more
You
chart.
get the last chart. Yeah, okay, the summary is that bioactive nitrogen, which is the most important parameter in Pleasant Bay set by MEP, they've changed significantly. The primary Sentinel Station trend line is below the MEP threshold target. The Meeting House Pond trend line is now meeting the MEP target. And if you look at the rest of the charts, you come to the conclusion that bioactive nitrogen levels are improving in Pleasant Bay. Again, it's clear that the system requires less nitrogen removal now. So again, we need to develop an adaptive management plan to address these issues. Mound Cove, bad shape, high nitrogen. The current plan will not fix that problem. Pleasant Bay, it looks like the plan may be overcorrecting because the nitrogen levels are lower. So I agree that with Mike that we ought to have some workshops where we get all the experts here. We have marine biologists, we have engineers, and let's take a look at this data and see if we can come up with a plan to, with AECOM, which has its own experts, and come up with a plan that will satisfy everybody. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Questions? Stakeholder questions first? Carolyn, go ahead.
I just have to say that bioactive nitrogen is not the only parameter, and if you're a fish and you can't breathe and there's no oxygen, then it doesn't matter what bioactive nitrogen of the moment is. And I did chart for all last summer, all the stations that we monitored and their dissolved oxygen levels, and they were all below, I can't at this moment tell you, about 80 or 90% of them were all below the standard that's provided to us.
6 milligrams a liter.
6 milligrams a liter, yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with your comment.
Okay. We have, just, Mike, do you want to just hit the high points on adaptive management again, because Ed has raised an issue, and how are we going to deal with that before I have any more comments?
Well, as I said earlier, the integrated long-term monitoring modeling plan is the approach that we're using. And that's basically to get people that have been doing the sampling together with the people that have been doing the modeling using that sampling data, along with another person. AECOM has a person that's done this for a living. Another fellow, Vic Bierman, does it for a living, as independent reviewers, to sit down and look at this and say, okay, what does all this mean, considering not just bioactive nitrogen, but all of the parameters, including sediment. The sediment is a huge issue here. So that's basically the plan, to do that gap analysis. Who's doing what? Do we have accurate data? Once we have that data, what is it telling us about current conditions as well as projections for future conditions? Under various scenarios, too. One scenario would be if the present Pleasant Bay gap closes.
Jeff, you were first, and then Paul.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment reinforcing the need for this MEP update. And it's particularly critical in the town code system because of the way the incoming nitrogen was established in the original MEP report. And there was some work done last summer, beginning of last summer, where the Brian Howes has been sent out to do some work to establish what the proper evaluation is of what's coming in. And that's a fundamental aspect of running the MEP model, is knowing what is coming in.
Paul, comment?
With regard to the nitrogen, there was a subtlety that Ed mentioned, but maybe you didn't catch. In Pleasant Bay, everything is determined based on bioactive nitrogen, which is a subset of total nitrogen. Other water bodies, it's total nitrogen. I think you ought to wrestle with this because the Pleasant Bay data, if you use total nitrogen, you might come up with slightly different conclusions. And MEP used the bioactive nitrogen in order to make the data work in Pleasant Bay in the 2001-2005.
Carol Ridley, just, your name has been mentioned here, so I'm going to call on you before I call on my wife.
Thank you. Ed had mentioned urging you all to look at the Cadmus study, and it is available to be downloaded on our website, www.pleasantbay.org. We looked at 20 stations that had enough data over the 14 years for in-depth analysis. Only 7 of those had any trends that were indicative of ecosystem improvement in terms of nutrient enrichment, as well as the response parameters such as dissolved oxygen. And as Ed points out, Nemaquoit South was one of those 7 stations. However, I don't believe that the report would support the statement that the system requires less nitrogen removal now. I don't think that's the result of the report at all. The focus of Ed's presentation has been on bioactive nitrogen, as we just established. There were 6 other parameters that were looked at for each of these stations. And the report indicates, even for Nemaquoit South, that there were no statistically significant trends for dissolved inorganic nitrogen or dissolved oxygen that were discernible, and therefore any definitive statements on improvement really were not possible. These are obviously stations we want to look at very closely and understand them better in terms of what the trends are really telling us. But as Carolyn pointed out a moment ago, in 2014, 80% of the dissolved oxygen readings were below the threshold for healthy water quality at that station. So clearly, there's still a significant issue there. It's also noteworthy that the other 12 stations, including Aries, Quonset, Nemaquoit North, Lonnie's, Poche Upper, all were highly variable in terms of the statistically significant trends. They were all over the map in terms of what they were telling us. So I think a broad statement that the system requires less nitrogen is not supported by what that report tells us. I also want to point out, and we're cautioned whenever we meet with the folks at Cadmus, to not project the trends forward. The trends are simply the trends for that period of data collection. So with all of that said, I would suggest and certainly offer that, you know, if we would like to invite the folks from Cadmus to come in and have a much more in-depth presentation and discussion of the data trends and what they mean and what they don't mean, I think that might be something of interest to the group, and you all can decide whether that's something you'd like to proceed with. I also wanted to mention at this time another initiative that the Alliance has underway. We have contracted with Wright Pierce and are also working with the Cape Cod Commission on the development of a watershed plan for Pleasant Bay. So what this process, in very brief form, consists of is that we're going to be comparing the loads that have been generated by the MEP as well as the loads that have been generated by the Commission's process to look at any differences or variations in those loads by each of the subwatersheds and coming up with a consensus load for each subwatershed. And then we are also combining the 4 plans such as they are in each of the 4 communities that share the watershed, including the consensus plan in terms of what each town is proposing to remove from each subwatershed based on those consensus nitrogen loads. And then in so doing, looking for ways or areas where there may be overlap, there may be too much nitrogen removal, there may be too little nitrogen removal, and looking for ways to identify possible efficiencies. That combined scenario or plan, if you will, that combines all 4 communities would then be run through the MEP model to make sure that we're meeting the threshold concentrations that are mandated by the TMDLs. So This is underway. We hope to have the results by the spring. Many of you around the table are participating in this. We're working very closely with the commission as well. But I think it's something that certainly is complementary to this group's work, and I'd be happy to keep you updated as this work progresses, but just wanted to make you aware of it at this time.
Mrs. McLennan.
I think that all of these comments are very good, and I think that we all agree that we need the updated information and the analysis from the experts who are qualified to do their work, and that would be wonderful to have further discussion about all of these technical issues, which are obviously very important. However, I'm looking at the clock, and I'm realizing that there are a number of agenda items, and I would hope that we would not prolong this discussion and would move forward.
Let me try and close it by asking if people here would like to have Cadmus come in and present their report to us. Any objections to that? Ed?
Mr. Chairman? No, I think
Do you
that's a great,
object?
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
But I would say this, the Cadmus guys did a mathematical statistical analysis. They said, we're numbers guys, we're not marine biologists. I would suggest in that same meeting or in the workshops that follow up, we bring some people like Brian Howes or the experts from AECOM, Dr. Browder, I guess you've got a real good water scientist on your staff.
Brocard.
Browder?
Brocard.
Brocard, yeah. I think we need both.
That's all being done.
And the second comment I want to make is, during my talk, I said that bioactive nitrogen levels are coming down. That's irrefutable. That's the data. I also said that if you look at dissolved oxygen, that's not coming down yet. But the theory is that if you tackle the nitrogen, these things don't all snap into place at 1 second. They take time, and that's a
Fine. Okay. What I'd like, Sim,
If I may. Very quickly, this discussion we've had for the last few minutes has hinged on the new inlet to Pleasant Bay and the additional flushing that Pleasant Bay has enjoyed since 2007. I think if we're going to have a meaningful discussion on how we use this information to plan for the future, we also have to have information, at least to the best of reasonable ability, on a forecast on how that flushing will continue, how it may expand, or how it may diminish.
okay.
Just one quick one.
Yes, go ahead.
Just to take off on what Sim said. Will we be factoring in the impact of the so-called Article 58, the navigation article, on the water flow in Town Cove?
Yes.
It would seem to me
That's being included. The bathymetric study that was done just about a week ago. We're going to compare it to the 3 other ones that have been done by other agencies over the last 5-7 years, and the work that Brian Howes is doing. So all of that information is being brought together. John?
And maybe in that same meeting, you have the Woods Hole group who's talking about a retreat from our Nauset beaches. We lose that area of beach to the ocean, so.
Woods Hole Group is doing the work in Town Cove, so they'll be here. Okay. I'd like to move on now. We've got 4 other things, well, 3. Let me start by going to number 8, just to get this out of the way so we don't run out of the room. I think, based on what I've observed today and what's been going on, our preliminary schedule of this group meeting every other month is not a good idea. There's too much going on, and I would hope that everybody would agree that we would meet at least monthly at the call of the Board of Selectmen and their consultants. And I would propose for procedural matters that the next meeting be on Wednesday, January 20th. Now, the reason I propose that is the Board of Selectmen have a standing wastewater meeting on the 2nd Wednesday of every month, which would be the 13th. And I want to make sure that the Board of Selectmen takes action on things before we run into our Water Quality Advisory Panel. So, and then we would meet in February and March, and as often as we had to, at the call of the membership of the committee. Is that all right?
Yes.
January 20th.
In the morning?
We'll set it in the morning, that's right. Same time, same place. John Hutchins?
Has the Board of Selectmen voted on that yet?
Voted on what?
To have monthly meetings? The last conversation was we're having the other meeting. So
I'll bring it up
that-
tonight.
that's
I want to see if people want to meet monthly, and we'll see if the Board of Selectmen supports the wish of the Water Quality Advisory Panel.
Alan, so we can count on the meeting in February and maybe April?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, let's go back. We've had some discussions this morning about mission of the Water Quality Advisory Panel. Is there any more discussion about that subject? Or have we worked it over during the last 2 hours and a half? Okay. We have on the item, on the agenda, goals for Springtown meeting. I think you can understand from what you've heard this morning that that is a moving target. We have a capital plan that was approved by the town, which set up certain things happening annually. The work program, I think, is going to evolve as we learn more and we discover perhaps things we don't know and we need to find out. So you will hear more about Springtown meeting as we proceed. The sixth item is one that I want to spend some time on.
Excuse me.
Yes.
On that particular item, I would suggest that we be much more explicit and develop very clear goals. I think we during the meetings last year, we raised this exact issue, and then as we approached town meeting, there were things that we simply had run out the clock and we had not addressed. For example, the financial stuff. So I think we're going to be faced with exactly the same issue. And last year, we outlined, sketched out some tentative plans for this coming spring. I'm not sure where we are on that, but in terms of very specific of what are we going to have from a monitoring proposal. This is good material, but it's very generic. It's very similar to what we've heard over the last several years in terms of what level of specificity are we going to have in terms of the pilot projects. To me, we don't have clear goals. If we miss those goals, we miss those goals, but I'm just concerned that what will happen this year is exactly what happened last year.
Well, Mike, you want to comment on that?
The plan for this year is essentially the items listed in the warrant article as fleshed out in the AECom scope of work with the deliverables as enumerated in that scope of work, which includes the things you just mentioned, the financial plan, which is analysis of the matrix I presented before, a more detailed plan, conceptual design, locations, costs for demonstration projects, plan for downtown collection, treatment, and disposal, given the obstacles we face with DOT. But essentially, it's the scope of work that they're addressing as embodied in an amended CWMP. That's the goal. That will include budgets for particular items for the next year's budget, which will conform with the capital plan that's in the current approved budget for the town. So it starts with their scope of work, goes to more detailed results, technical memorandums, and plans for next year, as well as budgets. So I think it's pretty specific. AECom is working very diligently on all these tasks on a number of fronts. That's why I think Mr. McLennan is proposing some additional meetings here, because as these things come out, we don't want to wait a month to look at them. So that's one of the reasons that would be beneficial. Does that help?
I'm simpler than that. What are we gonna have specific pilot projects we're gonna vote on next, what are we gonna vote on
Yes.
for next town meeting?
Yes.
All right.
Other questions?
I have a couple of comments, and that is, I've watched the procurement process very carefully. I think it was done in a professional way, and we've got a great contractor, AECom, doing the work. My concern is this: the contract was signed on October 20th, and unless AECom's been working on their own, going through the holidays, it appears as though this study is boiling down to a 4.5 or 5 month study. And we spent $1 million to fund this study, and I think that I was at least anticipating enough time so that we weren't rushing the contractor like we did the last time. And now we're talking about having meetings every month where they'll be preparing view graphs for us rather than working. I'm concerned that we're rushing this thing, and I've passed on my concerns to Mike. We want to do this right. So don't rush it. Do it right.
We're doing it right.
Okay.
Thank you. John?
Comment, having been in the consulting business for 50 years, it's always a good idea to have someone asking, where are you? And the monthly meetings would be an opportunity to ask, where are you? And where should we be headed, and where are we heading? So I'm really in agreement that these meetings are very, very important.
Okay. I want to go to 6. We had voted at our last meeting in September about public education process. And Jim McCauley and Jeff Eagles have been sort of beginning to think about this. And thank you, Carol, for joining us. One of you would like to take the lead here? Jeff?
Well,
let's talk about it conceptually. I think it's a good way to go, what you've been doing.
I mean, Jim's been involved, I've been involved, because, and others have participated and been involved in it. But what we've realized, I think, out of our work is we drafted a document which we sent to Mike, and Mike's had some input to that document to make a communication. And we want to be periodically communicating, hopefully after each monthly meeting, to the constituents of the stakeholders and other people in town, and the liaisons and their interest groups on what's going on here. And we need a process for carrying that out so that we have, I mean, it poses questions about who approves, how does it get approved, what's the discussion that takes place. I mean, conceptually, I think that there ought to be some communication, there's got to be some way to get comments on it, some way to process it and get it out. OWA is issuing newsletters to its constituents via MailChimp, which is proven to be very easy to work with. You work up a PDF document, bang it into, it's got an email list, and you push a button and out it goes. We're not saying everybody's got to use that system. You can do it any number of ways. But it's the issue is, how does this group agree to some message and then get the message out? Now, we can develop a baseline message among some group of people, and that can go out to the constituents and the stakeholders and the liaisons, and then the stakeholders and the liaisons can decide that they want to modify that to make a different message or a modified message to their groups. There's no one way to do it, but we need to agree, how this process is going to work.
Just to follow up on that, I think that we all admire and give Jeff credit. He's an excellent writer. In working together on this, even though on different issues we all have different opinions, we're committed to present a very fair, impartial assessment or report of where we are and what the activities are. What I would suggest is that perhaps we identify, and Sid and I spoke about this also, perhaps we identify a core group that comes up with a 95% draft, send it out to the stakeholders electronically, and unless there's strong objections, plan to send it out, say for this meeting, say if we target to send it out within the next couple of weeks. I think it loses its effectiveness if you wait as long as we do. So I think we've been talking about something like that.
You know, I mean, I think the idea that I like is getting a group together that develops the fair and objective message, and then sending it to this group of people, and if I don't know, the Taxpayers Association wants to amend that to suit their organization or their message, then that's what they send to their constituents. I think I think the idea of trying to battle it out and get a single uniform message is, somebody's going to do a hell of a lot of work, and nobody's going to be happy at the end of the day. Maybe.
Sandy from East Ham.
I've been thinking about this, and
Could you just stand up so they can see you?
East Ham. I've been thinking about this and liking what Jim and Jeff have looked at. But to this last point, Jeff, I, as a liaison from East Ham, wouldn't dream of changing what this group might have agreed on. What I would do might be to add a note as I sent it out saying, you know, from East Ham's viewpoint or my viewpoint. But I don't think the message should be changed.
Doug.
Yeah, just define what you mean by amending, because I agree with what's being said. We should all send out to our constituents the same message, reporting on the process and the meetings. And be mindful of the fact that when we agreed to the plan, it was by consensus. We all agreed to the plan, so that amending not be understood that you could begin to talk in a negative way about the plan. So if that's agreeable to us.
I'm not suggesting that we talk negatively about it. What I'm suggesting is that, you know, one organization may have some different way to express it, or something they like better. I'd love to have a single message that went out to everybody.
Should be.
I'm just questioning, is that process going to get mired in revision and revision and revision?
Well,
I don't know.
Just let me comment on that before we go further. We all sit around this table, and if you look at your cards, except Ed Daly's sitting in Dave Paul out right now, but if you look at your card.
Ron Joy has a pink shirt on.
Everybody has their name there, but they represent an organization, board, commission, or something else. And under the protocols for this process, our obligation is to make sure that our constituents, whoever they may be, get the message of what happens at these meetings. Now, as I look over what we've done over the last 2 hours and 47 minutes, we've had comments and questions, and the only action we took was we agreed to meet on January 20th. That was a formal decision that we made. So there is a report that can go out about this meeting of the kinds of things we looked at, the discussion we had, and people can pull it up and look at it. Having said that, Sid, I think you were next.
No, I think Jeff was referring to Gordon and the Taxpayer Association can add on. I think what he was meaning is that perhaps they dig a little deeper into part of, you know, more information on something that's more relevant to that particular group. That's not to change the messaging and give your own opinions on what it is. It's, you're still dealing with the facts.
Simmons?
My words exactly.
Okay. Jenny, I'm sorry.
Yes, no, that's okay, thank you.
My neck is stiff.
I think it's very important that neighbor to neighbor, everyone in town receives the same document. And that is, to me, of primary importance. So you're not saying, what did yours say, what did mine say, and we start the all my, yours business. And so, as Sandy said, if someone wants to have an opening statement about, please pay particular attention to, or we will develop this, or something like that. But it's very important to send out the same statement, and I think that Mike sent to everyone here yesterday, or George Meservey, what was considered an overview. And I think for the sake of expediency, that we'd use that as our first one, and the process would be that it would go to each panel member, and each panel member would send it out to his constituency.
Okay. Anything else on this subject? Jeff and Jim, you're going to handle this a little bit. You've got to get him, because he's going to be on a plane in about 2 days. You'll get it right after this. Okay, good. Get it done. And, you know, let's start. Okay. Any other items to come up this morning? If not, at 11:50 a.m., I would accept a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.